In 1967, a mother in suburban Cleveland fed her family of 6 on $18 a week using one-dish dinners. Her own mother taught her in the 50s. She never juggled 3 pots or dirtied every pan in the kitchen. She dumped ingredients into one casserole dish, one skillet, or one pot, slid it into the oven or onto the stove, and walked away. Her kids grew up healthy, happy, and full. While neighbors stressed over complicated recipes, she served hot meals every single night without breaking a sweat. Today, most people think cooking for a family means chaos and cleanup. The truth is simpler. These 60 forgotten one-dish dinners fed every American kid from 1950 to 1970 without fuss, without waste, and without dirty kitchens. Let's count down the meals that defined childhood. Tuna noodle casserole was the undisputed champion of weeknight dinners from the moment Campbell's pushed cream of mushroom soup into every American pantry in the 50s. Mothers boiled egg noodles, drained a can of tuna, stirred in a can of soup and a splash of milk, folded in frozen peas, dumped the whole thing into a greased casserole dish, topped it with crushed potato chips or breadcrumbs, and baked it at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Dinner for 6 cost less than $1. Kids scraped their plates clean. Leftovers reheated beautifully the next day. This casserole appeared at potlucks, church suppers, and Tuesday night tables across the country. It was reliable, forgiving, and fast. No fancy ingredients, no complicated steps, no reason to stress. Tuna noodle casserole kept families fed when time was short and money was tight. It still works today. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes baked together in one roasting pan was the Sunday dinner shortcut mothers relied on when they wanted comfort without chaos. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, an egg, chopped onion, ketchup, salt, and pepper formed the loaf in the center of the pan. Peeled and quartered potatoes sat around the edges, drizzled with a little oil and seasoning. The whole pan went into a 375-degree oven for an hour. The potatoes roasted while the meatloaf baked, soaking up the beef drippings and turning golden and tender. One pan, one meal, zero juggling. Kids loved the sweet ketchup glaze. Dads loved the hearty portions. Mothers loved the single dish to wash. And this was the meal that made Sundays manageable, even when the house was full and the schedule was tight. It fed families without fuss from 1950 straight through the 70s. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Spaghetti night in the 50s and 60s meant one big pot on the stove and a jar of ragu or prego in the cupboard. Mothers browned ground beef with chopped onion and garlic right in the pot, drained the fat, dumped in the jarred sauce, and let it simmer for 10 minutes. Then they broke dry spaghetti in half, pushed it down into the bubbling sauce, added a cup or 2 of water, covered the pot, and let everything cook together for another 12 minutes. The pasta absorbed the sauce, the flavors married, and dinner was ready without draining a single noodle or dirtying a second pot. Kids twirled forkfuls of saucy spaghetti while parents poured milk and sliced bread. The green can of Parmesan made its rounds. Spaghetti night was fast, cheap, filling, and foolproof. One pot fed the whole family. Chicken and rice bake was the casserole that saved weeknights when mothers worked late or ran out of ideas. Chicken pieces, drumsticks, thighs, breasts, laid flat in a greased baking dish. Uncooked white rice scattered underneath and around the chicken. A can of cream of chicken soup mixed with a can and a half of water poured over the top. A sprinkle of salt, pepper, and paprika finished it. Foil covered the dish, and the oven did the rest at 350 degrees for 90 minutes. The rice cooked in the chicken broth and soup, turning tender and flavorful. The chicken browned and stayed juicy. One dish. No stirring, no checking. Mothers could set the timer and help with homework. fold laundry, or just sit down. Chicken and rice bake-fed families reliably from the 50s through the 70s without fail. Sunday pot roast was the one-pot ritual that defined mid-century family dinners, a cheap chuck roast seared in a hot Dutch oven until browned on all sides, carrots, potatoes, onions, and celery chunks piled around the meat, a cup of beef broth, a bay leaf, salt, and pepper went in next, the lid clamped down tight, and the whole pot slid into a 325-degree oven for 3 hours. The house filled with the smell of slow-cooked beef and roasted vegetables. The roast turned fork-tender. The vegetables soaked up the rich, savory gravy. One pot fed 6 people with leftovers for sandwiches the next day. Pot roast marked time. Sundays meant family, rest, and a meal that required patience, but delivered comfort. It was the anchor of the week, cooked in one pot and served with pride. These 5 dinners fed every American family from 1950 to 1970. One dish, one pot, one pan. Mothers didn't juggle 3 burners or dirty every bowl in the kitchen. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and still had time to sit down at the table together. Sloppy Joes were the messy, beloved weeknight dinner that kids begged for and mothers made in one skillet in under 20 minutes. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a big pan, ketchup, brown sugar, a spoonful of yellow mustard, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, salt and pepper stirred in and simmered for 10 minutes until thick and saucy. Soft hamburger buns split open and piled high with the tangy beef mixture. Napkins stacked in the center of the table because nobody ate a sloppy Joe without making a mess. Kids loved the sweet, savory sauce. Parents loved the speed and the single pan to wash. Sloppy Joes appeared on Tuesday night tables, church potluck spreads, and school cafeteria trays from the 50s through the 70s. One pan fed the whole family with smiles, full bellies, and sticky fingers. Tater tot casserole became a Midwest legend the moment Ida invented tater tots in 1953, and mothers realized they could turn frozen potato cylinders into dinner. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a skillet, then spread into a greased 9x13 pan. A can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with a cup of milk poured over the beef. Frozen mixed vegetables, peas, carrots, corn, green beans, scattered on top. A single layer of frozen tater tots blanketed the whole thing. The casserole baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until the tots turned golden and crispy. Cheese melted over the top in the last 5 minutes if the family wanted it. One dish fed 6 people. Kids crunched through crispy tots to creamy beef below. Tater tot casserole ruled church suppers and weeknight tables across the heartland for decades. Chili con carne simmered in one pot on stovetops across America from the 50s through the 70s, feeding families when the weather turned cold and budgets stayed tight. Ground beef browned with diced onion and minced garlic, canned kidney beans, canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, chili powder, cumin, salt, and a pinch of cayenne stirred in. The pot simmered on low heat for an hour, letting the flavors marry and the beef turn tender. Mothers stirred occasionally, tasted, adjusted the spice. Kids set the table with bowls, spoons, saltine crackers, and shredded cheese. Chili filled bellies, warmed hands, and cost pennies per serving. Leftovers tasted even better the next day. One pot fed the whole family without fuss, without mess, and without anyone leaving the table hungry. Chili was reliable, comforting, and built for cold nights and tight budgets. Stovetop macaroni and cheese cooked in one pot on weeknights when kids were hungry. Time was short, and mothers needed something fast and foolproof. Elbow macaroni boiled in salted water until tender, then drained. The same pot went back on low heat. Butter melted. Milk poured in. Shredded cheddar cheese stirred until smooth and creamy, the drained macaroni dumped back into the pot and folded into the cheese sauce. Salt and pepper adjusted to taste. Dinner was ready in 15 minutes. No box, no powder, just real cheese, real butter, and real comfort. Kids ate seconds. Parents ate quietly, grateful for the speed and the single pot to wash. Stovetop mac and cheese fed families from the 50s through the 70s without fail. It was fast, cheap, creamy, and exactly what everyone wanted after a long day. Beef stroganoff turned into a one-pot weeknight staple in the 60s when mothers discovered they could skip the fancy steps and still deliver creamy, savory comfort. Ground beef browned with sliced onions and mushrooms in a big skillet. A can of cream of mushroom soup stirred in with a cup of beef broth and a spoonful of Worcestershire sauce. Egg noodles broke in half and pushed down into the bubbling sauce. The skillet covered and simmered for 12 minutes until the noodles turned tender and absorbed the sauce. A big spoonful of sour cream folded in at the end made everything rich and tangy. Salt and pepper adjusted. Dinner was ready in 30 minutes. One skillet fed 6 people. Kids loved the creamy noodles. Parents loved the single pan to wash. Beef stroganoff was weeknight elegance without the fuss. 10 dinners down. Everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s didn't complicate dinner. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and still had time to help with homework and sit down together. Shepherd's pie baked in one casserole dish and fed families when meat was scarce, money was tight, and comfort was needed. Ground beef browned with chopped onion, then mixed with frozen peas and carrots, a splash of beef broth, and a spoonful of Worcestershire sauce. The beef mixture spread into a greased baking dish. Mashed potatoes, leftover or freshly made, spread thick across the top like a blanket. A fork dragged across the surface made ridges that would crisp and brown in the oven. The casserole baked at 375 degrees for 30 minutes until the potatoes turned golden and the beef bubbled at the edges. One dish, one meal, one fork per person. Kids loved digging through creamy potatoes to savory beef below. Shepherd's pie was British by name, but American by necessity, feeding families from the 50s through the 70s without fuss. Baked spaghetti casserole was what happened when spaghetti night turned into leftovers and mothers got creative. Cooked spaghetti mixed with jarred meat sauce in a big bowl. Half the spaghetti spread into a greased 9x13 pan. A layer of cottage cheese or ricotta smoothed over the noodles. Shredded mozzarella scattered on top. The rest of the spaghetti layered over the cheese. More sauce drizzled on top. More mozzarella finished it. The casserole baked, covered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 10 more to brown the cheese. One pan fed 8 people. The spaghetti turned soft and saucy, the cheese melted into every layer, and the edges crisped up just right. Baked spaghetti casserole appeared at potlucks, church suppers, and weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s. It was reliable, filling, and made in one pan. Chicken pot pie baked in one casserole dish and brought comfort to every table lucky enough to have it. Cooked chicken, leftover roast, rotisserie or boiled, shredded and mixed with frozen mixed vegetables, cream of chicken soup, and a splash of milk in a big bowl. The mixture poured into a greased pie dish or casserole. Store-bought pie crust or biscuit dough draped over the top, edges crimped or pressed down. A few slits cut in the crust let steam escape. The pie baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until the crust turned golden and flaky and the filling bubbled at the edges. One dish, one meal. One golden crust that cracked under a fork to reveal creamy chicken and vegetables below. Chicken pot pie was Sunday dinner, Elegance baked into weeknight simplicity from the 50s through the 70s. Salisbury steak started as a fancy TV dinner, but mothers brought it home and made it real in one pan. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, an egg, chopped onion, salt, and pepper formed into oval patties. The patties browned in a big skillet, then moved to one side. Sliced onions and mushrooms sautéed in the beef drippings. A jar of beef gravy poured over the patties and vegetables. Peeled and quartered potatoes nestled into the gravy around the steaks. The skillet covered and simmered on low heat for 30 minutes until the potatoes turned tender and the gravy thickened. One pan, one meal. One savory, meaty comfort dinner. Kids ate every bite. Salisbury steak with gravy and potatoes fed families from the 60s through the 70s, proving TV dinner flavors could come from a real kitchen and a single skillet. Chili Mac combined two childhood favorites, chili and macaroni and cheese, into one pot and became weeknight legend. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and garlic in a big pot. Canned kidney beans, canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, chili powder, cumin, salt, and pepper stirred in. Elbow macaroni dumped straight into the bubbling chili with a cup of water. The pot covered and simmered for 12 minutes until the noodles turned tender and absorbed the chili. Shredded cheddar cheese stirred in at the end, melted into the sauce, and made everything creamy. One pot, one spoon, one bowl per kid. Chili Mac fed families fast, filled them up, and left one pot to wash. It appeared on weeknight tables and church potluck spreads from the 60s through the 70s. Kids loved it. Parents loved the speed. 15 dinners. Everyone made in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s didn't stress over dinner. They cooked fast, fed their families full, and cleaned up in minutes. That's how it was done. Green bean casserole got a protein boost when mothers added ground beef and turned the Thanksgiving side dish into a weeknight dinner. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a skillet, then spread into a greased casserole dish. 2 cans of drained green beans layered over the beef. A can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with a half cup of milk poured over the beans. A can of French fried onions scattered on top. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the onions turned golden and crispy and the sauce bubbled at the edges. One dish, one meal. One crunchy, creamy, savory dinner. Kids crunched through fried onions to tender green beans and seasoned beef below. Green bean casserole with ground beef fed families from the 50s through the 70s when sides needed to become mains. Ham and scalloped potatoes baked in one casserole dish and fed families when Sunday ham turned into Monday dinner. Thinly sliced potatoes layered in a greased baking dish, diced leftover ham scattered between the potato layers. A simple white sauce, butter, flour, milk, salt, and pepper, poured over the potatoes and ham until everything was covered. The casserole covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 60 minutes, then uncovered for 15 more to brown the top. The potatoes turned tender, the ham stayed moist, and the sauce thickened into creamy perfection. One dish fed 6 people. Ham and scalloped potatoes appeared at church suppers, weeknight tables, and holiday leftover meals from the 50s through the 70s. It was reliable, comforting, and made in one pan. Kids scraped their plates clean every time. Johnny Marzetti was Ohio's answer to one-dish dinners and became a casserole legend across the Midwest in the 50s and 60s. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and bell pepper in a skillet. Cooked egg noodles, tomato sauce, a can of diced tomatoes, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar mixed into the beef. Half the mixture spread into a greased 9 by 13 pan. shredded cheddar cheese layered over the noodles. The rest of the beef and noodles spread on top. More cheese finished it. The casserole baked covered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 10 more to melt and brown the cheese. One pan fed 8 people. Johnny Marzetti was hearty, cheesy, and perfect for potlucks and weeknight tables. It fed Ohio families for decades and still shows up in church cookbooks today. American goulash had nothing to do with Hungary, but everything to do with feeding families fast in one pot. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and garlic in a big pot, canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, Italian seasoning, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar stirred in. Elbow macaroni dumped straight into the bubbling sauce with a cup of water. The pot covered and simmered for 12 minutes until the noodles turned tender and absorbed the tomato sauce. A handful of shredded cheddar stirred in at the end made it creamy. One pot, one meal, one spoon to wash. American goulash fed families from the 50s through the 70s without fuss or fancy ingredients. Kids loved the cheesy tomato noodles. Parents loved the single pot and the speed. It was weeknight perfection. King Ranch chicken casserole was Texas comfort baked into one dish and spread across the country in the 50s. Cooked chicken, shredded rotisserie or leftover roast, mixed with cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup, a can of Rotel tomatoes with green chilies, and a splash of chicken broth. Torn corn tortillas layered the bottom of a greased 9x13 pan. Half the chicken mixture spread over the tortillas. Shredded cheddar and Monterey Jack cheese scattered on top. Another layer of tortillas, the rest of the chicken, and more cheese finished it. The casserole baked covered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 15 more to brown the cheese. One pan fed 8 people. King Ranch chicken was creamy, cheesy, slightly spicy, and beloved at church suppers and weeknight tables from Texas to Ohio. 20 dinners. Everyone made in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and still had time to sit down at the table. That's how dinner worked from 1950 to 1970. BBQ chicken and potatoes on a single sheet pan became weeknight salvation in the 60s when mothers discovered they could skip the stovetop and let the oven do all the work. Chicken pieces, drumsticks, thighs, breasts, laid flat on a rimmed baking sheet. Quartered potatoes scattered around the chicken, drizzled with a little oil, salt, and pepper. The whole pan slid into a 400-degree oven for 30 minutes. Halfway through, mothers pulled the pan out, brushed store-bought BBQ sauce, Sweet Baby Ray's, Kraft or homemade, over every piece of chicken, and slid it back in for another 20 minutes. The chicken turned sticky, caramelized, and tender. The potatoes roasted golden and crispy, soaking up the BBQ drippings that pooled on the pan. One sheet pan, one meal, one simple dinner that fed 6 people without dirtying a single pot. Kids licked BBQ sauce off their fingers. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single pan to wash, and the fact that the oven did all the work while they helped with homework or folded laundry. BBQ chicken and potatoes appeared on Tuesday night tables, backyard picnic spreads, and church potluck lines from the 60s through the 70s. It was fast, foolproof, and forgiving. You could swap the BBQ sauce, change the chicken cuts, add carrots or onions, and it still worked. The pan came out sticky and delicious every single time. BBQ chicken and potatoes proved that one-dish dinners didn't have to be complicated to be loved. Simple worked. One pan fed the whole family. Pork chops and rice bake was the casserole that saved weeknights when mothers ran out of ideas and needed something fast, filling, and made in one dish. 4 to 6 bone-in pork chops laid flat in a greased 9 by 13 baking dish. Uncooked white rice scattered underneath and around the chops. A can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with a can and a half of water poured over the rice and pork. Chopped onion, salt, pepper, and a sprinkle of paprika finished it. Foil covered the dish tight, and the whole thing baked at 350 degrees for 90 minutes. The rice cooked in the soup and pork drippings, turning tender and flavorful. The pork chops stayed juicy and browned beautifully on top. Mothers could set the timer and walk away. No stirring, no checking, no standing at the stove. The oven did all the work while they helped kids with homework, folded a load of laundry, or just sat down and rested for a few minutes. One dish fed 6 people. Kids ate the creamy rice first, then worked through the tender pork chops. Pork chops and rice bake appeared on weeknight tables and church potluck spreads from the 50s through the 70s. It was reliable, forgiving, and built for busy mothers who needed dinner to happen without chaos. You could swap cream of chicken soup for mushroom, add frozen peas or green beans, or skip the onion if the kids complained. The casserole still worked. Pork chops and rice bake was proof that simple dinners fed families best. Spanish rice skillet cooked on the stovetop in one pan and brought bold, savory flavor to weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s. Ground beef browned with chopped onion, bell pepper, and minced garlic in a big cast-iron skillet. The beef drained if needed, then pushed to the edges. Uncooked white rice toasted in the center of the pan for a minute until it smelled nutty. Canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, beef broth, chili powder, cumin, salt, and pepper stirred into the rice and beef. The skillet covered and simmered on low heat for 20 minutes until the rice turned tender and absorbed all the liquid. A sprinkle of shredded cheddar cheese melted over the top in the last 2 minutes if the family wanted it. 1 skillet, 1 meal, 1 spoon to wash. Spanish rice fed families fast when time was tight and money was tighter. Kids loved the seasoned rice and cheesy topping. Dads ate seconds straight from the pan. Mothers loved the speed, the single skillet, and the fact that dinner cost less than $2 and fed 6 people. Spanish rice skillet appeared on Tuesday night tables, church basement potluck lines, and scout troop campout menus. It was fast, filling, forgiving, and built for busy weeknights. You could swap ground turkey for beef, skip the bell pepper, add frozen corn, or make it spicier with jalapenos. The skillet still worked. Spanish rice was reliable comfort cooked in one pan and served with pride. It fed families from the 50s through the 70s without fail. Chicken a la king simmered in one pot and brought creamy, savory elegance to weeknight tables and Sunday suppers from the 50s through the 60s. Cooked chicken, leftover roast, rotisserie, or boiled, shredded and set aside, butter melted in a big pot, chopped onion, celery, and sliced mushrooms sautéed until soft, flour stirred in to make a roux, then chicken broth and milk poured in slowly, whisking constantly until the sauce thickened and turned smooth. The shredded chicken folded back into the sauce, along with frozen peas and diced pimientos from a jar. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of paprika adjusted the flavor. The pot simmered on low heat for 10 minutes, letting everything marry together. Chicken a la king ladled over toast points, split biscuits, puff pastry shells, or white rice. 1 pot, 1 ladle, 1 creamy, comforting meal. Kids ate the creamy chicken and peas first, then soaked up the sauce with their toast. Dads praised the rich, savory flavor. Mothers loved the single pot to wash, and the fact that leftover chicken turned into something elegant without extra work. Chicken a la king appeared on Sunday supper tables, ladies' luncheon menus, and weeknight tables when mothers wanted something special without the fuss. You could skip the pimientos, use cream of chicken soup instead of making the sauce from scratch, or add a splash of sherry if you felt fancy. The pot still delivered creamy, comforting chicken. Chicken a la king proved that one-pot dinners could feel elegant and feed families beautifully from the 50s through the 60s. Corned beef hash cooked in one cast-iron skillet and turned breakfast into dinner when mothers needed something fast, filling, and made from pantry staples. Diced potatoes, leftover boiled or raw, fried in a hot skillet with a little butter or bacon grease until golden and crispy on the edges. Chopped onions stirred in and cooked until soft. A can of corned beef, Hormel, Libby's, or any brand, crumbled into the skillet and mixed with the potatoes and onions. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of paprika seasoned the hash. The whole mixture pressed down flat in the skillet and left alone for 5 minutes to form a golden crust on the bottom. A spatula flipped sections over to brown the other side. Eggs cracked directly into wells made in the hash or fried separately and laid on top. One skillet, one spatula, one breakfast for dinner meal that fed families from the 50s through the 70s. Kids loved the crispy potatoes and salty corned beef. Dads broke the egg yolk and mixed it into the hash. Mothers loved the speed, the single pan, and the fact that a can of corned beef and a few potatoes could feed 6 people for pennies. Corned beef hash appeared on Tuesday night tables, camping trip cookouts, and late-night diner menus across the country. You could swap canned corned beef for leftover pot roast, add bell peppers, or skip the eggs entirely. The skillet still delivered crispy, savory comfort. Corned beef hash proved that breakfast foods belonged at dinner tables, too. 25 dinners down, everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one skillet. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how dinner worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time. Beans and Frank's casserole baked in one dish and fed families when money was tight and kids needed something filling, fast, and familiar. 2 cans of pork and beans, Van Camp's, Bush's, or Campbell's, poured into a greased casserole dish. Brown sugar, a spoonful of mustard, a splash of ketchup, and a pinch of onion powder stirred into the beans. Hot dogs, the cheap ones that came 8 to a pack, sliced into rounds or left whole and scored on top. The hot dogs pushed down into the beans, half buried so they'd soak up the sauce. A few strips of bacon laid across the top if the family wanted it fancy. The casserole baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 40 minutes until the beans bubbled and the hot dogs browned. One dish, one meal, one spoon to serve. Kids loved the sweet. Tangy beans and the hot dogs that tasted like summer. Dads ate straight from the dish. Mothers loved the fact that 2 cans, a pack of hot dogs, and a few pantry staples fed 6 people for under $2. Beans and Frank's casserole appeared on weeknight tables, scout troop cookout menus, and church potluck spreads from the 50s through the 70s. You could skip the bacon, swap regular mustard for Dijon, add chopped onion, or use turkey dogs if you wanted. The casserole still worked. Beans and Frank's was reliable, filling, and made in one dish. It fed families without fuss, without waste, and without anyone leaving the table hungry. That's all that mattered. Swedish meatballs over egg noodles became a one-pot weeknight shortcut in the 60s when mothers discovered frozen meatballs and canned soup could deliver comfort without the work. A bag of frozen meatballs, IKEA, store brand, or homemade from Sunday, dropped into a big pot. A can of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of beef broth, a big spoonful of sour cream, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce, stirred together and poured over the meatballs. The pot simmered on low heat for 20 minutes, stirring occasionally until the meatballs heated through and the sauce thickened. Egg noodles boiled in a separate pot, drained, then dumped directly into the meatball sauce and tossed until coated. One pot, one serving spoon, one creamy, savory dinner. Kids loved the tender meatballs and creamy noodles. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the speed, the single pot, and the fact that frozen meatballs meant no browning, no rolling, no extra steps. Swedish meatballs over egg noodles appeared on weeknight tables, church basement potluck spreads, and holiday buffet lines from the 60s through the 70s. You could make the meatballs from scratch if you had time: ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, onion, salt, pepper, nutmeg, but frozen worked just as well. You could swap cream of chicken soup for mushroom, skip the sour cream, or add a pinch of dill if you wanted it more Swedish. The pot still delivered creamy, comforting meatballs and noodles. Swedish meatballs proved that one-pot dinners could feel elegant and feed families beautifully without complicated steps or dirty kitchens. Hamburger Helper launched in 1971 and became an instant weeknight legend, turning 1 pound of ground beef and 1 box into a complete one-pot meal in under 30 minutes. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a big skillet, the Hamburger Helper seasoning packet, cheeseburger macaroni, beef noodle, stroganoff, or any of the 5 original flavors, stirred into the beef along with the dried pasta, water, and milk. The skillet covered and simmered for 12 minutes, stirring occasionally until the noodles turned tender and the sauce thickened into creamy, cheesy perfection. 1 skillet, 1 spoon, 1 meal that fed 6 people. Kids loved the cheesy, slightly tangy sauce and the soft macaroni. Dads ate straight from the pan. Mothers loved the speed, the single skillet, and the fact that 1 box cost 50 cents and stretched 1 pound of beef into a full family dinner. Hamburger Helper appeared on Tuesday night tables, college dorm hot plates, and babysitter emergency menus from 1971 through the end of the decade and beyond. Critics called it processed and fake. Families called it fast and reliable. Hamburger Helper fed kids when mothers worked late, when money was tight, when dinner needed to happen fast without fuss or cleanup. You could doctor it up, add frozen peas, extra cheese, hot sauce, or garlic, but the box worked perfectly on its own. Hamburger Helper proved that convenience foods had a place at the table when families needed dinner to happen without chaos. 1 skillet fed the whole family, and that was enough. Creamy beef and noodles simmered in 1 pot and brought rich, savory comfort to weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a big pot. A can of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of beef broth, a big spoonful of sour cream, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, salt and pepper stirred into the beef. Egg noodles broke in half and pushed down into the bubbling sauce. The pot covered and simmered for 12 minutes, stirring occasionally, until the noodles turned tender and absorbed the creamy beef sauce. A handful of shredded cheddar stirred in at the end made everything richer. 1 pot, 1 spoon, 1 creamy, comforting dinner. Kids loved the soft noodles and savory beef sauce. Dads ate seconds straight from the pot. Mothers loved the speed, the single pot, and the fact that pantry staples, a can of soup, a pound of beef, a bag of noodles, could feed 6 people without complicated steps or fancy ingredients. Creamy beef and noodles appeared on weeknight tables, church potluck spreads, and scout troop campout menus from the 50s through the 70s. You could swap cream of chicken soup for mushroom, skip the sour cream, add frozen peas or sliced mushrooms, or use ground turkey instead of beef. The pot still delivered creamy, savory comfort. Creamy beef and noodles proved that one-pot dinners didn't need complicated steps or fancy ingredients to feed families well. Simple worked. One pot fed the whole family, and everyone left the table happy and full. Chicken and dumplings simmered in one pot and brought Grandma's comfort to every table lucky enough to have it. Chicken pieces, thighs, breasts, drumsticks, boiled in a big pot of salted water with chopped onion, celery, carrots, and a bay leaf, until the chicken turned tender and the broth filled with flavor. The chicken pulled from the pot, shredded, and returned to the broth along with the vegetables. The pot brought back to a gentle boil. Biscuit dough, store-bought or homemade from flour, baking powder, salt, butter, and milk, dropped by spoonfuls onto the bubbling broth. The pot covered tight and simmered for 15 minutes without lifting the lid. The dumplings steamed, puffed, and turned fluffy and tender. One pot, one ladle, one spoonful of soft dumplings, tender chicken, and rich broth per bowl. Kids ate the dumplings first, then worked through the chicken and vegetables. Dads soaked up every drop of broth with the dumplings. Mothers loved the single pot, the fact that one chicken and a few pantry staples fed 8 people, and the way the house smelled like Grandma's kitchen. Chicken and dumplings appeared on Sunday supper tables, sick-day comfort meals, and cold-weather weeknight dinners from the 50s through the 70s. You could use rotisserie chicken to save time, swap canned biscuits for homemade dough, or add frozen peas in the last 5 minutes. The pot still delivered soft, fluffy dumplings and rich, savory broth. Chicken and dumplings was one-pot comfort at its finest, feeding families with love and warmth. 30 dinners. Everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked fast, fed their families full, and cleaned up in minutes. That's how dinner worked from 1950 to 1970. Simple, reliable. One pot at a time. Stuffed pepper casserole was what happened when mothers loved stuffed peppers but didn't have time to hollow out and stuff individual peppers. Ground beef browned with chopped onion, and minced garlic in a big skillet, then scraped into a greased 9x13 baking dish. Cooked white rice mixed into the beef. Chopped bell peppers, green, red, yellow, whatever was on sale, scattered over the beef and rice. Canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, salt, pepper, Italian seasoning, and a pinch of sugar poured over everything. The casserole covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the peppers turned tender. Shredded mozzarella or cheddar sprinkled on top in the last 10 minutes melted into gooey perfection. One dish, one meal, one deconstructed stuffed pepper dinner that fed 6 people without the fussy work of stuffing individual peppers. Kids loved the cheesy topping and the sweet bell peppers. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that it baked while they helped with homework, and the way leftovers reheated beautifully the next day. Stuffed pepper casserole appeared on weeknight tables and church potluck spreads from the 60s through the 70s. You could use ground turkey, skip the rice and use cauliflower rice, add corn or black beans, or make it spicier with jalapenos. The casserole still worked. Stuffed pepper casserole was all the flavor of stuffed peppers without the fuss, baked in one dish, and served with pride. It fed families from the 60s through the 70s without complicated steps or dirty kitchens. Porcupine meatballs earned their name because uncooked rice mixed into the ground beef poked out like quills when the meatballs cooked. Ground beef mixed with uncooked white rice, chopped onion, an egg, salt, and pepper in a big bowl. The mixture rolled into golf ball-sized meatballs and arranged in a single layer in a greased baking dish or deep skillet. Tomato sauce or a can of tomato soup mixed with a cup of water poured over the meatballs until they were almost covered. The dish covered with foil or a lid and baked at 350 degrees, or simmered on the stovetop, for 60 minutes. The rice cooked inside the meatballs and in the sauce, turning tender and poking out like little porcupine quills. One dish, one meal, one quirky, kid-friendly dinner that fed families from the 50s through the 70s. Kids loved the funny name and the way the rice stuck out of the meatballs. Dads loved the hearty, filling meal. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that the rice cooked right inside the meatballs so there was no side dish to make, and the way the tomato sauce turned rich and savory as the meatballs simmered. Porcupine meatballs appeared on weeknight tables, church basement potluck spreads, and scout troop cookout menus. You could swap tomato sauce for cream of mushroom soup, add frozen peas or corn, or make the meatballs bigger or smaller. The dish still worked. Porcupine meatballs were reliable, filling, and made in one dish. They fed families without fuss or fancy ingredients. Tuna and rice casserole stretched pantry staples into a full family dinner when money was tight and creativity was needed. Cooked white rice, leftover or freshly made, spread into a greased casserole dish. 2 cans of drained tuna flaked over the rice. Frozen peas scattered on top. A can of cream of celery or cream of mushroom soup mixed with a cup of milk poured over everything. Crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter sprinkled on top for crunch. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 35 minutes until the sauce bubbled and the topping turned golden and crispy. One dish, one meal, one pantry staple casserole that fed 6 people for under $2. Kids loved the creamy rice and the crunchy topping. Dads ate quietly, grateful for a hot meal. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that canned tuna and leftover rice could become dinner, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully the next day. Tuna and rice casserole appeared on weeknight tables, church potluck spreads, and Lenten Friday dinners from the 50s through the 70s. You could swap tuna for canned salmon, use cream of chicken soup, skip the peas, or add chopped celery and onion if you wanted more vegetables. The casserole still worked. Tuna and rice casserole was proof that pantry staples and a little creativity could feed families well without complicated steps or expensive ingredients. One dish fed the whole family, and everyone left the table full. Ground beef browned with chopped onion, salt, and pepper, then spread over the potatoes. Another layer of sliced potatoes went on top of the beef. A can of cream of mushroom soup, mixed with a cup of milk, poured over everything until the casseroles were almost covered. The dish covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 90 minutes until the potatoes turned fork tender. Shredded cheddar cheese, sprinkled on top in the last 10 minutes, melted into gooey perfection. One dish, one meal, one simple, layered casserole that fed 6 people without complicated steps or fancy ingredients. Kids loved the cheesy potatoes and savory beef. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that the oven did all the work, and the way the casserole fed the family for less than $3. Ground beef and potato casserole appeared on weeknight tables, church potluck spreads, and holiday leftover meals from the 50s through the 70s. You could swap cream of celery soup for mushroom, add frozen mixed vegetables between the layers, skip the cheese, or use ground turkey instead of beef. The casserole still worked. Ground beef and potato casserole was reliable, filling, and made in one dish. It fed families from the 50s through the 70s without fuss, without waste, and without anyone leaving the table hungry. Church supper hot dish was the Midwest casserole that appeared at every potluck, funeral luncheon, and Wednesday night church supper from the 50s through the 70s. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a skillet, then mixed with cooked elbow macaroni, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of tomato soup, a cup of milk, salt, and pepper in a big bowl. The mixture poured into a greased 9x13 baking dish. Shredded cheddar cheese sprinkled on top. The casserole baked covered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 15 more to brown and bubble the cheese. One dish, one meal, one church basement staple that fed 12 people. Kids loved the cheesy, tomatoey macaroni. Adults ate quietly, grateful for the simple, filling comfort. Mothers loved the single dish. The fact that it fed a crowd for under $5, and the way it traveled well in a covered dish and reheated beautifully in the church kitchen. Church supper, hot dish appeared at potlucks, funeral luncheons, Wednesday night suppers, and scout troop dinners across the Midwest. You could swap ground turkey for beef, use cream of chicken soup, skip the tomato soup and double the mushroom soup, or add frozen peas and carrots. The casserole still worked. Church supper hot dish was reliable, forgiving, and built for feeding crowds without fuss. It fed families and congregations from the 50s through the 70s without complicated steps or fancy ingredients. One dish fed everyone, and everyone left the table full and grateful. 35 dinners, everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how weeknight dinners worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time, no fuss, no waste. Cabbage roll casserole delivered all the flavor of traditional cabbage rolls without the fussy work of rolling and stuffing individual leaves. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big skillet, then scraped into a greased 9x13 baking dish. Cooked white rice mixed into the beef. Chopped cabbage, half a head, roughly chopped, layered over the beef and rice. Canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar, and a bay leaf poured over the cabbage. The casserole covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 60 minutes until the cabbage turned tender and sweet. Shredded mozzarella or cheddar sprinkled on top in the last 10 minutes melted into perfection. One dish, one meal, one deconstructed cabbage roll dinner that fed 6 people without the hours of rolling and steaming individual cabbage leaves. Kids loved the sweet cabbage and cheesy topping. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that it baked while they helped with homework, and the way the cabbage sweetened as it cooked. Cabbage roll casserole appeared on weeknight tables, church potluck spreads, and Eastern European family dinners from the 50s through the 70s. You could use ground turkey or pork, swap cauliflower rice for white rice, skip the cheese, or add caraway seeds for a more traditional flavor. The casserole still worked. Cabbage roll casserole was all the flavor of traditional cabbage rolls without the fuss, baked in one dish and served with pride. It fed families from the 50s through the 70s without complicated steps or dirty kitchens. Salmon patties and creamed peas cooked in one skillet and fed families when Friday meant meatless meals and budgets stayed tight. Canned salmon, bones and skin included, drained and mashed in a big bowl. Crushed saltine crackers, an egg, a spoonful of chopped onion, salt and pepper mixed into the salmon. The mixture formed into patties and fried in a hot skillet with a little butter or oil until golden and crispy on both sides. The patties moved to one side of the skillet, frozen peas dumped into the other side with a splash of milk, a tablespoon of butter, salt, and pepper. The peas simmered until tender and the milk thickened into a creamy sauce. One skillet, one spatula, one meatless Friday dinner that fed families from the 50s through the 70s. Kids loved the crispy salmon patties and the sweet-creamed peas. Dads ate quietly, grateful for a hot meal even on meatless days. Mothers loved the single skillet, the fact that canned salmon cost pennies and stretched into a full meal, and the way the peas cooked right alongside the patties without dirtying another pot. Salmon patties and creamed peas appeared on Friday night tables, Lenten dinners, and tight-budget weeknight meals. You could swap canned tuna for salmon, skip the creamed peas and serve applesauce instead, or add a squeeze of lemon juice to the patties. The skillet still worked. Salmon patties and creamed peas proved that meatless dinners didn't have to be boring or complicated. One skillet fed the whole family, and everyone left the table full. Poor man's stew simmered in one pot and fed families when money disappeared and creativity took over. Ground beef browned with chopped onion in a big pot, diced potatoes, sliced carrots, chopped celery, and a can of diced tomatoes dumped into the pot. Tomato sauce, beef broth, salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and a pinch of sugar stirred in. The pot covered and simmered on low heat for 45 minutes, stirring occasionally, until the vegetables turned tender and the broth thickened into a rich, savory stew. A slice of bread or a handful of crackers soaked up every last drop from the bottom of the bowl. One pot, one ladle, one cheap, filling stew that fed 6 people for under $2. Kids ate the soft carrots and potatoes first, then worked through the seasoned beef. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single pot, the fact that cheap vegetables and a pound of beef could feed the whole family, and the way the stew tasted even better the next day. Poor man's stew appeared on weeknight tables, church basement soup kitchens, and Depression-era holdover menus from the 50s through the 70s. You could swap ground turkey for beef, add frozen green beans or corn, skip the celery, or thicken the stew with a slurry of cornstarch and water. The pot still delivered hearty, filling comfort. Poor man's stew proved that simple ingredients in one pot could feed families well when money was tight and time was short. One pot fed the whole family. Navy bean and ham hock soup simmered in one pot for hours and filled the house with the smell of slow-cooked comfort. Dried navy beans soaked overnight in cold water, then drained. A ham hock, left over from Sunday dinner or bought cheap at the butcher, dropped into a big pot with the beans, chopped onion, sliced carrots, chopped celery, a bay leaf, salt, and pepper. Enough water poured in to cover everything by 2 inches. The pot brought to a boil, then reduced to a low simmer for 3 hours, stirring occasionally, until the beans turned tender and creamy and the ham hock meat fell off the bone. The ham hock pulled from the pot, the meat shredded and stirred back into the soup. One pot, one ladle, one slow-cooked, soul-warming soup that fed 8 people for pennies. Kids loved the creamy beans and tender ham. Dads soaked up the rich broth with cornbread or crackers. Mothers loved the single pot, the fact that a ham bone and a bag of beans could feed the family for days, and the way the soup tasted better every time it reheated. Navy bean and ham hock soup appeared on Sunday supper tables, cold weather weeknight dinners, and Depression-era holdover menus from the 50s through the 70s. You could skip the ham hock and use bacon or sausage, add diced potatoes, swap kidney beans for navy beans, or blend half the soup for a creamier texture. The pot still delivered rich, comforting warmth. Navy bean soup fed families for generations. Baked ziti was Italian-American comfort baked into one dish and served at Sunday suppers, church potlucks, and weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s. Ziti pasta boiled in salted water until just tender, then drained. Ground beef or Italian sausage browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big skillet. Jarred marinara sauce stirred into the meat. The cooked ziti mixed with the meat sauce and half a container of ricotta cheese in a big bowl. Half the ziti mixture spread into a greased 9x13 baking dish. Shredded mozzarella and grated Parmesan scattered over the ziti. The rest of the ziti layered on top. More mozzarella and Parmesan finished it. The casserole baked covered at 375 degrees for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 15 more to brown and bubble the cheese. One dish, one meal. One Italian-American classic that fed 8 people. Kids loved the cheesy, saucy pasta. Dads ate seconds. Mothers loved the single dish. You could skip the meat and make it vegetarian, use cottage cheese instead of ricotta, add spinach or mushrooms, or swap penne for ziti. The casserole still worked. Baked ziti was reliable, cheesy, and made in one dish. It fed families from the 50s through the 70s without complicated steps or fancy ingredients. 40 dinners down, everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how dinner worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time. Chicken Devon casserole became the elegant one-dish dinner that appeared at ladies' luncheons, church potlucks, and Sunday supper tables from the 50s through the 70s, proving that simple ingredients could deliver sophisticated flavor without complicated steps. Fresh or frozen broccoli florets steamed until just tender, then drained well and spread across the bottom of a greased 9x13 baking dish. Cooked chicken, shredded rotisserie, leftover roast, or poached breasts, layered over the broccoli in an even blanket. A can of cream of chicken soup mixed with a half cup of mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon juice, a splash of milk, and a pinch of curry powder whisked together in a bowl until smooth and poured over the chicken and broccoli, coating every piece. Shredded cheddar cheese sprinkled generously over the top, followed by a layer of buttered breadcrumbs for crunch. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes until the sauce bubbled at the edges, the cheese melted into golden pools, and the breadcrumbs turned crispy and brown. One dish, one meal, one casserole that fed 8 people and felt fancy enough for company without requiring fancy skills or expensive ingredients. Kids ate around the broccoli at first, then discovered the creamy sauce made even vegetables taste good. Dads praised the tender chicken and rich, cheesy sauce. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that leftover chicken and a bag of frozen broccoli could become something elegant, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for next-day lunches. Chicken Devon appeared at potlucks where women competed quietly with their best casseroles, at Sunday suppers when the preacher came for dinner, and at weeknight tables when mothers wanted something special without the stress. The name sounded French and fancy, but the recipe was pure American practicality: canned soup, rotisserie chicken, frozen vegetables, and a casserole dish. You could swap fresh broccoli for frozen, use cream of mushroom soup instead of chicken, skip the curry powder if the family didn't like it, add cooked rice underneath the broccoli to stretch the meal further, or replace the mayonnaise with sour cream for a Tangier sauce. The casserole still worked. Chicken Devon was forgiving, adaptable, and built for busy mothers who needed dinner to feel special without requiring culinary school training or hours at the stove. Swiss steak simmered in one pot or baked in one dish and brought tender, fork-soft beef to Sunday supper tables and weeknight dinners from the 50s through the 70s, proving that cheap cuts of meat could become melt-in-your-mouth comfort with patience and a little tomato sauce. Round steak, top round or bottom round, the cheap, tough cuts butchers sold for pennies per pound, pounded thin with a meat mallet to tenderize the tough muscle fibers. Flour seasoned with salt and pepper dredged over both sides of the steak, then pounded in again until the flour stuck to the meat. The floured steaks browned in a hot skillet with a little oil until golden and crusty on both sides, then transferred to a baking dish or left in an oven-safe skillet. Sliced onions, bell peppers, and celery sautéed in the same skillet until soft, soaking up the browned bits left behind by the steak. Canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, a pinch of sugar, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf stirred into the vegetables, then poured over the browned steaks until they were almost covered. The dish covered tight with foil or a lid and slid into a 325-degree oven for 2 hours or left to simmer on the stovetop on the lowest heat. The steaks braised slowly in the tomato sauce, turning fork tender and soaking up the savory, slightly sweet tomato-vegetable gravy. The flour coating thickened the sauce into rich, spoonable perfection. Mothers could set the timer and walk away, help with homework, fold laundry, or just sit down and rest while the oven did all the work. The house filled with the smell of slow-cooked beef and tomatoes, a scent that told everyone dinner was going to be good. One dish, one meal, one slow-cooked tender steak dinner that fed 6 people and cost less than $3 for the whole pan. Kids loved the soft, falling-apart beef and the rich tomato gravy spooned over mashed potatoes or rice. Dads ate seconds, mopping up every drop of sauce with bread. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that cheap round steak could become something tender and delicious with time and heat, and the way the leftovers reheated even better the next day. Swiss steak appeared on Sunday supper tables when the preacher came for dinner, on weeknight tables when mothers had time to let dinner simmer, and on church potluck spreads where every casserole competed quietly for compliments. Skillet lasagna, cooked on the stovetop in one pan and delivered all the layered, cheesy, saucy comfort of traditional lasagna without boiling noodles, layering ingredients in a baking dish, or waiting an hour for the oven. Ground beef, or Italian sausage, browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big, deep skillet. Cast iron worked best, but any large skillet with a lid did the job. Jarred marinara sauce poured into the browned meat, along with a cup of water, a pinch of Italian seasoning, salt and pepper. The sauce brought to a simmer. Lasagna noodles broken into bite-sized pieces, rough, irregular chunks, not neat squares, dropped directly into the bubbling sauce and pushed down until mostly submerged. The skillet covered tight and simmered on medium-low heat for 20 minutes. And stirring occasionally to keep the noodles from sticking to the bottom until the pasta turned tender and absorbed most of the sauce. Spoonfuls of ricotta cheese, or cottage cheese if that's what the family had, dolloped over the top of the noodles. Shredded mozzarella scattered generously over the ricotta. Grated Parmesan sprinkled on top for good measure. The skillet covered again for 5 more minutes, just long enough for the cheeses to melt into gooey, stretchy perfection. The lid lifted, the skillet carried straight to the table, and everyone served themselves directly from the pan with a big spoon, scooping layers of saucy noodles, melted cheese, and seasoned meat onto their plates. One skillet, one spoon, one stovetop lasagna that fed 6 people in under 40 minutes without boiling a single noodle or turning on the oven. Kids loved the cheesy, saucy pasta and the fact that they could see all the layers right in the pan. Dads ate seconds, scraping the crispy bits from the edges of the skillet. Mothers loved the single pan, the speed, the fact that lasagna could happen on a Tuesday night without the fuss of traditional layering and baking, and the way cleanup meant one skillet and one spoon instead of a pot, a colander, a baking dish, and a spatula. Skillet lasagna appeared on weeknight tables when families craved Italian comfort but didn't have time for the full production. Spanish chicken and rice cooked in one pot and brought bold, savory, slightly smoky flavor to weeknight tables from the 60s through the 70s, proving that chicken, rice, and a few pantry staples could deliver a complete meal without juggling multiple pots or complicated steps. Chicken pieces, drumsticks, thighs, breasts, seasoned generously with salt, pepper, and paprika, then browned skin side down in a hot Dutch oven or deep skillet with a little oil until golden and crispy. The chicken flipped and browned on the other side, then removed from the pot and set aside. Chopped onion, bell pepper, and minced garlic sautéed in the chicken drippings left behind until soft and fragrant. Uncooked white rice toasted in the vegetables for a minute until it smelled nutty and started to turn translucent. Canned diced tomatoes, chicken broth, a pinch of saffron or turmeric for color, a bay leaf, salt, pepper, and a good shake of paprika stirred into the rice. The browned chicken pieces nestled back into the rice and vegetables, skin side up so it stayed crispy. The pot covered tight and simmered on low heat for 35 to 40 minutes until the rice turned tender, the chicken cooked through, and the liquid absorbed into the rice, leaving it fluffy and flavorful. Frozen peas stirred in during the last 5 minutes added color and sweetness. The pot uncovered, the chicken skin checked to make sure it stayed crispy, and the whole dish carried straight to the table where everyone scooped rice and chicken onto their plates, the rice stained golden orange from the paprika and tomatoes, the chicken falling off the bone, the peas bright green against the golden rice. One pot, one meal. One Spanish-inspired dinner that fed 6 people without fuss, without fancy ingredients, and without dirtying every pot in the kitchen. Kids loved the slightly sweet rice and the tender chicken they could eat with their hands. Dads praised the bold, smoky flavor and 8 seconds. Mothers loved the single pot, the fact that chicken, rice, and vegetables cooked together without needing side dishes, and the way the house smelled like a Spanish kitchen, even though the recipe came from a church cookbook or a back-of-the-rice box card. Spanish chicken and rice appeared on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something that felt special without requiring extra work, and on Sunday supper tables when the family craved something different from the usual pot roast or meatloaf. Beef and noodle bake was the casserole that saved weeknights when mothers needed something filling, comforting, and made in one dish without complicated steps or expensive ingredients. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big skillet, then drained if needed to remove excess grease. Cooked egg noodles, boiled in salted water until just tender, then drained, dumped into the skillet with the beef. A can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of cream of chicken soup, or 2 cans of mushroom if that's what the pantry held, a cup of sour cream, a splash of milk, salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder stirred into the beef and noodles until everything coated evenly in the creamy sauce. The whole mixture scraped into a greased 9 by 13 baking dish and spread smooth. Shredded cheddar cheese scattered generously over the top, followed by crushed cornflakes or breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter for a crunchy topping. The casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes until the sauce bubbled at the edges, the cheese melted into golden pools, and the topping turned crispy and brown. One dish, one meal. One creamy, cheesy, comforting casserole that fed 8 people and left everyone scraping their plates clean. Kids loved the soft, creamy noodles and the crunchy topping they could crunch through with their forks. Dads ate seconds, sometimes thirds, and praised the rich, savory flavor. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that canned soup and a pound of beef could stretch into a full family dinner, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for next-day lunches or quick dinners later in the week. Beef and noodle bake appeared on weeknight tables when time was short. On church potluck spreads, where casseroles competed for compliments, and on holiday buffet tables when the family gathered and someone needed to bring a crowd-pleasing dish that traveled well and stayed warm. You could swap ground turkey for beef, use all cream of mushroom soup and skip the chicken soup, replace sour cream with cream cheese for a richer sauce, add frozen peas or green beans for vegetables, skip the crunchy topping and just use cheese, or make it spicier with a shake of cayenne pepper. The casserole still worked. Beef and noodle bake was forgiving, adaptable, and built for busy mothers who needed dinner to happen without chaos or cleanup. It proved that canned soup, ground beef, and egg noodles could deliver comfort and satisfaction 45 dinners down. Everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how dinner worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time. One-pan pork chops and potatoes roasted together in a single sheet pan or baking dish and brought simple, satisfying comfort to weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s, proving that meat and potatoes didn't need multiple pots or complicated steps to feed a family well. Bone-in pork chops, thick cut if you could afford them, thin if you couldn't, seasoned generously on both sides with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. Potatoes peeled or left unpeeled, then cut into wedges or chunks and tossed with a little oil, salt, pepper, and a pinch of dried thyme or rosemary. The pork chops arranged in a single layer in a greased 9 by 13 baking dish or on a rimmed sheet pan. The seasoned potatoes scattered around the chops, filling in the spaces so every inch of the pan held food. A few tablespoons of butter cut into small pieces and dotted over the pork chops and potatoes added richness and helped everything brown beautifully. The pan slid into a 375-degree oven for 45 to 50 minutes until the pork chops cooked through and stayed juicy. The potatoes turned golden and fork-tender, and the whole pan smelled like Sunday dinner, even though it was Tuesday night. One pan, one meal, one simple, satisfying dinner that fed 6 people and left one pan to wash at the end of the night. Kids loved the crispy, golden potatoes and the tender pork chops they could cut with a fork. Dads ate quietly, grateful for a hot, filling meal that tasted like someone cared. Mothers loved the single pan, the fact that pork chops and potatoes cooked together without needing side dishes or extra pots, and the way the drippings from the pork chops flavored the potatoes as they roasted. One-pan pork chops and potatoes appeared on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something simple but satisfying, on Sunday supper tables when the family needed comfort without fuss, And on tight budget weeks when pork chops on sale and a bag of potatoes could stretch into a full family dinner for under $4. You could swap bone-in chops for boneless, use sweet potatoes instead of white potatoes, add sliced onions or baby carrots to the pan, drizzle everything with a little honey or maple syrup for sweetness, or skip the butter and use olive oil instead. The pan still delivered tender pork chops and golden, crispy potatoes. Turkey. Tetrazzini became the casserole that turned Thanksgiving leftovers into something elegant and delicious, appearing on post-holiday tables from the 50s through the 70s, and proving that leftover turkey didn't have to mean boring sandwiches or dry reheated slices. Spaghetti or linguine boiled in salted water until just tender, then drained and set aside. Butter melted in a big skillet. Sliced mushrooms and chopped onion sautéed until soft and golden. Flour stirred into the mushrooms and onions to make a roux, then chicken broth and heavy cream poured in slowly, whisking constantly until the sauce thickened and turned smooth and velvety. Shredded leftover turkey, white meat, dark meat, whatever the family had, folded into the creamy sauce along with the cooked pasta, a handful of frozen peas if you wanted vegetables, salt, pepper, a pinch of nutmeg, and a splash of sherry if the family felt fancy. The whole mixture poured into a greased 9x13 baking dish and spread smooth. Grated Parmesan cheese and breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter sprinkled generously over the top for a crunchy, golden finish. The casserole baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 30 minutes until the sauce bubbled at the edges and the topping turned crispy and brown. One dish, one meal, one elegant, creamy casserole that fed 8 people and made leftover turkey feel special instead of tired. Kids loved the creamy pasta and the crunchy topping. Dads ate seconds, praising the rich, savory sauce. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that leftover turkey could become something company-worthy, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners throughout the week. Turkey tetrazzini appeared on post-Thanksgiving tables when the family needed a break from turkey sandwiches, on church potluck spreads where it competed quietly with tuna noodle casserole and green bean casserole, and on weeknight tables year-round when rotisserie chicken stood in for leftover turkey. The name sounded Italian and fancy, but the recipe was pure American comfort. Leftover turkey, canned mushrooms, if fresh weren't available, jarred parmesan, and a casserole dish. You could swap chicken for turkey, use cream of mushroom soup instead of making a sauce from scratch, skip the sherry and add a squeeze of lemon juice instead, replace the heavy cream with milk and an extra tablespoon of butter, or add chopped bell peppers or pimientos for color. The casserole still worked. Turkey tetrazzini was forgiving, adaptable, and built for busy mothers who needed leftovers to turn into something delicious without requiring culinary school skills or hours at the stove. Hamburger steak and onions cooked in one skillet and brought savory, gravy-covered comfort to weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s, proving that ground beef could be shaped, browned, and smothered into something that felt like Sunday dinner, even on a Tuesday night. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, an egg, a spoonful of chopped onion, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, salt and pepper, in a big bowl until everything combined. The mixture divided and shaped into oval patties, like thick hamburgers but without buns, about half an inch thick so they'd cook through without drying out. The patties browned in a hot skillet with a little oil until crusty and golden on both sides, then moved to a plate and set aside. Sliced onions, thick rings or half-moons, dumped into the same skillet and cooked in the beef drippings until soft, golden, and caramelized. Flour sprinkled over the onions and stirred in to soak up the drippings. Beef broth poured in slowly, whisking constantly, until a rich brown gravy formed and thickened. The hamburger steaks nestled back into the gravy and onions, spooned over with sauce so every patty glistened. The skillet covered and simmered on low heat for 15 minutes until the patties cooked through and soaked up the gravy. One skillet, one spatula, one savory gravy-smothered dinner that fed 6 people and left everyone scraping their plates clean. Kids loved the tender, juicy hamburger steaks and the sweet caramelized onions. Dads soaked up every drop of gravy with mashed potatoes, rice, or bread. Mothers loved the single skillet. The fact that ground beef could become something that looked and tasted like a restaurant meal, and the way the gravy made everything taste rich and special, even though the ingredients cost less than $3. Hamburger steak and onions appeared on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something filling and comforting, on Sunday supper tables when the family craved meat and gravy, and on tight budget weeks when ground beef and onions had to stretch into a full family dinner. You could swap ground turkey for beef, add sliced mushrooms to the onions, use cream of mushroom soup instead of making gravy from scratch, skip the breadcrumbs and just use the egg to bind the meat, or make the gravy richer with a splash of heavy cream or sour cream at the end. The skillet still delivered tender hamburger steaks and rich, savory gravy. Hamburger steak and onions proved that ground beef could be elegant, that one skillet could feed a family beautifully, and that simple ingredients could deliver satisfaction and comfort without complicated steps or fancy techniques. Hamburger steak and onions fed families from the 50s through the 70s with simplicity, reliability, and the kind of gravy that made everyone ask for seconds. One skillet, one meal, one family fed well. That's all that mattered. Tuna and noodle skillet cooked entirely on the stovetop in one pan and delivered all the creamy, comforting flavor of tuna noodle casserole without turning on the oven or dirtying a baking dish. Egg noodles boiled in salted water in a big, deep skillet until just tender, then drained and set aside. The same skillet wiped out quickly, then returned to the stove. Butter melted. Chopped onion and celery sautéed until soft. A can of cream of mushroom soup stirred into the vegetables along with a cup of milk, a splash of lemon juice, salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder. The mixture simmered and stirred until smooth and creamy. 2 cans of drained tuna flaked into the sauce along with the cooked noodles and a cup of frozen peas. Everything folded together gently until the noodles and tuna coated evenly in the creamy sauce. The skillet simmered on low heat for 5 more minutes, stirring occasionally until the peas warmed through and the sauce thickened slightly. Shredded cheddar cheese, stirred in at the very end, melted into the sauce and made everything richer. Or one skillet, one spoon, one stovetop version of the classic casserole that fed 6 people in under 30 minutes without heating up the kitchen or dirtying multiple pots and pans. Kids loved the creamy noodles and the fact that dinner happened fast. Dads ate seconds straight from the skillet. Mothers loved the single pan, the speed, the fact that pantry staples, canned tuna, canned soup, egg noodles, could become dinner without requiring the oven or a baking dish, and the way cleanup meant one skillet and one spoon instead of a pot, a colander, a baking dish, and a serving spoon. Tuna and noodle skillet appeared on weeknight tables when mothers needed dinner fast, on camping trip menus when a single skillet over a camp stove had to feed the whole family, and on hot summer nights when turning on the oven felt unbearable. You could swap cream of chicken soup for mushroom, use fresh mushrooms instead of canned, skip the celery and just use onion, add a handful of crushed potato chips on top for crunch, or make it tangier with an extra squeeze of lemon juice. The skillet still delivered creamy, comforting tuna and noodles. Tuna and noodle skillet proved that casserole flavors didn't require a casserole dish. that stovetop shortcuts could deliver the same satisfaction as baked versions, and that one skillet could feed a family beautifully without complicated steps or long cooking times. Tuna and noodle skillet fed families from the 50s through the 70s with speed, simplicity, and the kind of creamy comfort that made everyone leave the table happy and full. One skillet, one meal, one family fed well without fuss or cleanup. That's all a weeknight dinner needed to be. Simple, fast, delicious, one skillet at a time. Scalloped potatoes and ham baked in one casserole dish and turned Sunday ham leftovers into Monday dinner, feeding families from the 50s through the 70s with creamy, cheesy, one-dish simplicity. Potatoes peeled and sliced thin, about 1/8 of an inch thick, thin enough to cook through but thick enough to hold their shape, using a sharp knife or a mandolin slicer if the family had one. Diced leftover ham from Sunday dinner, Easter, or Christmas, cut into small cubes. A simple white sauce made on the stovetop. Butter melted in a saucepan, flour whisked in to make a roux, then milk poured in slowly, whisking constantly until the sauce thickened and turned smooth and creamy. Salt, pepper, a pinch of nutmeg, and a handful of shredded cheddar cheese stirred into the sauce until the cheese melted. Half the sliced potatoes layered into a greased 9x13 baking dish. Half the diced ham scattered over the potatoes. Half the cheese sauce poured over the ham and potatoes. The remaining potatoes layered on top. The rest of the ham scattered over the second layer of potatoes. The remaining sauce poured over everything, making sure every potato slice got coated. A final sprinkle of shredded cheddar cheese on top for good measure. The dish covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 60 minutes. The foil removed, and the casserole baked uncovered for another 20 to 30 minutes until the potatoes turned fork tender, the sauce bubbled at the edges, and the cheese on top browned and turned golden. One dish, one meal, and one creamy, cheesy casserole that fed 6 people and turned leftover ham into something the family requested again and again. Kids loved the soft, creamy potatoes and the salty ham cubes hidden in every bite. Dads ate seconds, scraping the dish for the crispy, cheesy edges. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that leftover ham and a bag of potatoes could feed the family without needing side dishes or extra pots, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners later in the week. Scalloped potatoes and ham appeared on post-holiday tables when the family needed a break from cold ham sandwiches, on church potluck spreads where it competed with green bean casserole and macaroni salad, and on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something filling and comforting without complicated steps. You could use cream of mushroom soup instead of making white sauce from scratch. Swap Swiss cheese for cheddar, skip the ham and make it vegetarian, add sliced onions between the layers, or use sweet potatoes instead of white potatoes for a different flavor. The casserole still worked. Scalloped potatoes and ham proved that leftovers didn't have to be boring, that one dish could feed a family beautifully, and that simple ingredients could deliver creamy, cheesy comfort without requiring culinary skills or hours at the stove. 50 dinners. Everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 didn't complicate weeknights. They cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how dinner worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time. Shipwreck casserole earned its name because the layers of ingredients looked like they'd been washed ashore and piled together, but the messy appearance delivered organized, filling comfort that fed families from the Depression through the 70s without requiring fancy ingredients or complicated steps. Ground beef, browned with chopped onion in a skillet, seasoned with salt and pepper, then drained and spread across the bottom of a greased 9 by 13 baking dish. Uncooked white rice scattered over the beef in an even layer, creating the foundation that would soak up all the flavors as the casserole baked. Thinly sliced potatoes layered over the rice, overlapping slightly so they covered every inch. Chopped celery scattered over the potatoes for crunch and flavor. A can of kidney beans or pork and beans dumped over the vegetables, spreading out as much as possible. Canned diced tomatoes and tomato sauce poured over everything until the casserole was almost covered in liquid. Salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar to balance the tomatoes, and a bay leaf tucked into the mixture for depth. The whole dish covered tight with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 90 minutes until the rice turned tender, the potatoes cooked through, and all the layers married together into one cohesive, savory meal. The foil removed for the last 15 minutes to let the top brown slightly and the excess liquid evaporate. One dish, one meal, one layered, messy, beautiful casserole that fed 8 people and cost less than $3 for the entire pan. The casserole still worked. Shipwreck casserole proved that simple, inexpensive ingredients layered together in one dish could feed families beautifully without requiring culinary skills, fancy techniques, or expensive cuts of meat. Shipwreck casserole fed families from the Depression era through the 70s. Dish, one meal, one family fed well. That's all that mattered back then, and it still matters today. Tuna Wiggle earned its funny name because the creamy sauce jiggled and wiggled when spooned over toast or biscuits, but the simple, comforting flavor made it a weeknight staple from the 30s through the 60s. Butter melted in a medium saucepan over medium heat. Flour whisked into the butter to make a smooth golden roux that smelled nutty and rich. Milk poured in slowly, whisking constantly to prevent lumps until the sauce thickened into a creamy, velvety white sauce. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of paprika for color whisked in. 2 cans of drained tuna, along with a cup of frozen peas and a spoonful of chopped onion if the family liked it. The mixture simmered on low heat for 5 minutes, stirring occasionally until the peas warmed through and the sauce bubbled gently. Toast points, white bread toasted golden and cut into triangles, arranged on plates, of lemon juice for brightness. The pot still delivered creamy, comforting Tuna Wiggle. Tuna Wiggle proved that simple, inexpensive ingredients could feed families well, that pantry staples could turn into something comforting and satisfying without requiring fancy techniques, and that one pot and a can of tuna could deliver warmth, nourishment, and full bellies when that's all a family needed. One pot, one meal, one family fed well without fuss or waste. Hot chicken salad. Casserole took everything people loved about cold chicken salad, tender chicken, crunchy celery, creamy mayonnaise, and baked it into a hot, bubbly, golden-topped casserole that fed families from the 50s through the 70s and appeared at every ladies' luncheon, church potluck, and weeknight table when mothers needed something elegant without complicated steps. Cooked chicken, shredded rotisserie, leftover roast, or poached breasts, cut into bite-sized chunks and mixed in a big bowl with chopped celery, chopped onion, a can of sliced water chestnuts for crunch, and a handful of sliced almonds or chopped pecans if the family had them. Mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon juice, and a splash of milk, salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder stirred into the chicken mixture until everything coated evenly. The mixture spread into a greased 9 by 13 baking dish, shredded cheddar cheese scattered over the top, crushed potato chips, plain Lay's worked best, mixed with a tablespoon of melted butter and sprinkled generously over the cheese to create a crunchy golden topping. Casserole baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes until the edges bubbled, the cheese melted, and the potato chip topping turned crispy and golden brown. One dish, one meal, one hot, creamy, crunchy casserole that fed 8 people and felt elegant enough for company without requiring fancy ingredients or culinary school training. Kids loved the crunchy potato chip topping and the creamy chicken underneath. Dads ate quietly, impressed by the combination of textures and flavors. Others loved the single dish, the fact that leftover chicken could become something special, and the way the casserole traveled well to potlucks and reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners later in the week. Hot chicken salad casserole appeared at ladies' luncheons, where women served it with fruit salad and iced tea, at church potlucks where it competed with green bean casserole and tuna noodle casserole, and on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something that felt fancy without the fuss. Liver and onions with mashed potatoes, cooked mostly in one pan and divided families down the middle. Kids hated it, dads loved it, and mothers served it because beef liver cost pennies per pound and delivered iron, protein, and vitamins when budgets stayed tight from the 50s through the 70s. Beef liver sliced thin at the butcher counter, about half an inch thick, so it would cook through quickly without turning tough and rubbery. The liver soaked in milk for 30 minutes to an hour before cooking, a trick grandmothers swore by to remove the strong metallic flavor that made kids gag. The liver patted dry with paper towels, then dredged in seasoned flour, salt, pepper, garlic powder mixed with all-purpose flour, sliced onions sautéed in a hot cast-iron skillet with butter and a little bacon grease until soft, golden, and caramelized, then moved to a plate and set aside. The floured liver slices cooked in the same skillet, 2 to 3 minutes per side, and just until browned on the outside and slightly pink in the center. Overcooked liver turned tough, grainy, and bitter, so timing mattered. The caramelized onions spooned back over the liver. A splash of beef broth or water deglazed the pan, scraping up the browned bits to make a simple pan sauce. Mashed potatoes made separately in a pot, but served on the same plate as the liver and onions, the creamy potatoes soaking up the pan sauce and making every bite more palatable. One skillet, one pot for the potatoes, one meal that fed 6 people and cost less than $2 for the whole dinner. Kids pushed the liver around their plates, ate the onions and mashed potatoes, and begged for seconds of anything except the liver. Dads praised the rich, iron-heavy flavor and 8 seconds of liver, soaking up the pan sauce with the mashed potatoes. Mothers ate quietly, knowing the liver delivered nutrition the family needed even if half the table complained. Liver and onions appeared on weeknight tables when budgets were tight and iron-rich food mattered, on Depression-era holdover menus when mothers cooked what their mothers taught them, and on tables where dads grew up eating liver and demanded it regularly even when the kids protested. You could swap chicken livers for beef liver and cook them faster, add bacon to the pan for extra flavor, use chicken broth instead of beef broth, or serve the liver with rice instead of mashed potatoes. Skillet still delivered liver and onions, though the kids still complained. Tamale pie brought the flavors of Mexican tamales, spiced ground beef, cornmeal, chili, into one casserole dish and fed families from the 40s through the 70s without requiring the complicated work of wrapping individual corn husks or steaming tamales for hours. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big skillet, chili powder, cumin, salt, pepper, and a pinch of oregano stirred into the beef. A can of diced tomatoes, a can of corn kernels, and a can of sliced black olives, if the family liked them, mixed into the seasoned beef. The mixture simmered for 10 minutes until thick and savory, then spread into a greased 9 by 13 baking dish. A simple cornmeal topping mixed in a bowl, cornmeal, flour, baking powder, salt, an egg, milk, and a tablespoon of melted butter whisked together until smooth. The cornmeal batter poured over the beef mixture and spread carefully to cover the top like a blanket. Shredded cheddar cheese sprinkled over the cornmeal topping if the family wanted it. The casserole baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes until the cornmeal topping puffed up, turned golden brown, and felt firm to the touch. One dish, one meal. One Southwestern-inspired casserole that fed 8 people and brought bold, spiced flavor to tables that usually stuck to pot roast and meatloaf. Kids loved the slightly sweet cornbread topping and the seasoned beef underneath. Dads ate seconds, praising the chili-spiced flavor and the way the cornbread soaked up the juices from the beef. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that pantry staples, ground beef, cornmeal, canned tomatoes, could become something that felt exotic and special, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners later in the week. Tamale pie appeared on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something different from the usual casseroles, on church potluck spreads where it competed with Italian casseroles and tuna noodle bakes, and on Southwestern-themed dinner nights when families wanted to try something new without leaving their comfort zones. 55 dinners, everyone cooked in one pot, one pan, or one dish. Mothers from 1950 to 1970 cooked smart, fed their families full, and cleaned up fast. That's how dinner worked. Simple, reliable, one dish at a time, no fuss, no waste. City chicken earned its name during the Depression when pork and veal cost less than actual chicken, so families skewered cubed pork or veal onto wooden sticks to mimic chicken drumsticks, breaded them, and baked them into a meal that fed families from the 30s through the 60s without requiring expensive poultry. Pork shoulder or veal stew meat cut into 1.5-inch cubes at the butcher counter or at home. 3 to 4 meat cubes threaded onto wooden skewers, pressed together tightly to form a shape that looked like a chicken drumstick. The meat skewers seasoned with salt and pepper, then dredged in flour, dipped in beaten egg, and rolled in breadcrumbs until coated completely. The breaded skewers arranged in a single layer in a greased baking dish or on a rimmed sheet pan. A few tablespoons of butter or oil drizzled over the skewers to help them brown. The dish baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 45 to 50 minutes until the coating turned golden and crispy and the meat cooked through and stayed tender. City chicken proved that creativity and necessity could combine to create something delicious, that mock versions of expensive foods could satisfy just as well as the real thing, and that one dish could feed a family beautifully even when the budget allowed only the cheapest cuts of meat. One dish, one meal, one mock chicken dinner that fed families through hard times with dignity and flavor. Creamed chipped beef on toast earned its military nickname, SOS, which stood for Save Our Stomachs in polite company and something less polite everywhere else. But the simple, creamy, salty comfort fed soldiers during World War II and families from the 40s through the 70s, butter melted in a medium saucepan, flour whisked into the butter to make a smooth, golden roux. Milk poured in slowly, whisking constantly to prevent lumps, until the sauce thickened into a creamy, velvety white sauce. The shredded dried beef stirred into the sauce, along with a pinch of black pepper, no salt needed because the beef brought plenty, and a shake of paprika for color. The mixture simmered on low heat for 5 minutes, stirring occasionally, and until the sauce bubbled gently and the beef warmed through and flavored the sauce with its salty, savory richness. White bread, toasted golden and cut into triangles or left whole. The creamy chipped beef ladled generously over the toast, covering every piece and pooling slightly on the plate. One pot, one ladle. One simple, creamy, salty meal that fed 6 people in under 20 minutes without requiring fresh meat, expensive ingredients, or complicated steps. Kids ate quietly, some loving the salty, creamy flavor, and others pushing it around their plates. Creamed chipped beef on toast appeared on weeknight tables when money was tight, on breakfast for dinner nights when the family wanted something fast and filling, and on military holdover menus when dads demanded the foods they ate during their service years. American chop suey had nothing to do with Chinese food and everything to do with feeding New England families from the 40s through the 70s with one pot of ground beef, macaroni, and tomatoes that stretched the food budget without sacrificing flavor or satisfaction. Ground beef browned with chopped onion and minced garlic in a big pot. A can of diced tomatoes, a can of tomato sauce, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, Italian seasoning, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar stirred into the beef. Elbow macaroni dumped straight into the bubbling tomato-beef mixture, along with a cup of water. The pot covered and simmered for 12 to 15 minutes, stirring occasionally to keep the macaroni from sticking to the bottom, until the noodles turned tender and absorbed most of the sauce. Shredded cheddar cheese, stirred in at the end, melted into the sauce and made everything creamy and rich. One pot, one spoon, one simple tomatoey, cheesy dinner that fed 6 people in under 30 minutes without requiring multiple pots or complicated steps. Kids loved the soft macaroni and the sweet, tangy tomato sauce. Dads ate seconds, praising the filling, satisfying comfort. Mothers loved the single pot, the speed, the fact that ground beef and a box of macaroni could become dinner without dirtying every pot in the kitchen, and the way the leftovers reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners later in the week. American chop suey appeared on weeknight tables when time was short and budgets were tight, on school cafeteria lunch lines where it fed hundreds of kids at once, and on church potluck spreads where it competed with other ground beef casseroles for compliments. American chop suey fed New England families and beyond from the 40s through the 70s with practicality, speed, and the kind of filling comfort that made everyone leave the table satisfied. One pot, one meal, one regional classic that fed families beautifully without fuss, without waste, and without anyone caring that the name made no sense. That's all that mattered. Pork chop casserole with stuffing brought Thanksgiving flavors to weeknight tables from the 50s through the 70s and proved that pork chops and stuffing didn't need a holiday to feed families beautifully in one dish. Bone-in pork chops, 4 to 6 depending on family size, seasoned generously on both sides with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. The pork chops browned quickly in a hot skillet with a little oil until golden on both sides, then set aside on a plate. Packaged stuffing mix, Stovetop or any brand, prepared according to the box directions with chicken broth and butter, then spread into a greased 9x13 baking dish. The browned pork chops arranged on top of the stuffing in a single layer, pressed down slightly so they nestled into the stuffing. A can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with a half cup of milk poured over the pork chops and stuffing, coating everything in creamy sauce. The casserole covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until the pork chops cooked through and stayed juicy and the stuffing soaked up the soup and pork drippings. The foil removed for the last 10 minutes to let the top brown slightly. One dish, one meal, one Thanksgiving-flavored casserole that fed 6 people on a Tuesday night and made the house smell like Sunday dinner. Kids loved the soft, savory stuffing and the tender pork chops. Dads ate seconds, praising the way the stuffing tasted like the holidays. Mothers loved the single dish, the fact that a box of stuffing mix and a few pork chops could become something that felt special and festive, and the way the casserole reheated beautifully for lunches and quick dinners later in the week. Pork chop casserole with stuffing appeared on weeknight tables when mothers wanted something comforting without complicated steps. Pork chop casserole with stuffing fed families from the 50s through the 70s with simplicity, comfort, and the kind of Thanksgiving-inspired flavor that made everyone leave the table satisfied and asking when it would appear again. One dish, one meal, one family fed well with holiday comfort on a weeknight budget. Ham and bean soup simmered in one pot for hours and filled the house with the smell of slow-cooked, soul-warming comfort, feeding families from the Depression through the 70s with a soup that stretched a ham bone and a bag of dried beans into days of meals. Dried navy beans or Great Northern beans soaked overnight in cold water, then drained. A leftover ham bone from Sunday dinner, Easter, or Christmas, dropped into a big pot along with the soaked beans, chopped onion, sliced carrots, chopped celery, a bay leaf, salt, and pepper. Enough water poured in to cover everything by 2 inches, the pot brought to a boil, then reduced to a low simmer for 3 to 4 hours, stirring occasionally until the beans turned creamy and tender and started to break down slightly, thickening the soup naturally. The ham bone pulled from the pot, the meat shredded off the bone and stirred back into the soup. The soup tasted and adjusted with more salt and pepper if needed. One pot, one ladle, one slow-cooked, soul-warming soup that fed 8 people and cost pennies per serving. Kids loved the creamy beans and tender ham. Dads soaked up the rich broth with cornbread, crackers, or crusty bread. Mothers loved the single pot, the fact that a ham bone and a bag of beans could feed the family for days, and the way the soup tasted better every time it reheated, the flavors deepening and marrying with each warming. These 61-dish dinners prove that mothers from 1950 to 1970 were not just cooks. They were architects of comfort, efficiency, and love. Every casserole, every skillet, every pot told a story of families gathered around tables, kids scraping plates clean, and mothers who refused to let tight budgets or busy schedules stop them from feeding their families well. Tight budgets and kitchens that didn't have dishwashers or microwaves to make cleanup easy. One dish fed the whole family, and that was enough. The mothers who made these meals are mostly gone now, but their recipes remain, written in faded ink on index cards, penciled into church cookbooks, and remembered by the grandchildren who sat at their tables and left with full bellies and warm hearts. These 60 dinners are more than food. They are proof that one dish, one pot, one pan can feed a family beautifully without fuss, without waste, and without losing your mind in the kitchen. Which of these 60 one-dish dinners will you make this week? Drop the number in the comments and tell us if your mom or grandma made it for you. Share this with someone who needs easy dinner ideas that actually work. Let's bring these one-dish dinners back where they belong, on our tables, in our kitchens, feeding our families the way they fed generations before us.